You guys tell me all the time that you'd like to see more budget builds here on the channel, which is why today I've rounded up the best parts for a system that costs a shave over $600. All of these parts combine to deliver great 1080p performance, all for less than the price of an RTX 4070 Super. Let's do this. Newegg's wide range of PC hardware offers you great choice with a range of tools to make your life that bit easier. The PC Builder tool, for example, allows you to build and configure a custom PC with ease. Simply select your preferred parts and let the tool do the rest. There's even an AI builder that can recommend a custom PC based on your specifications. Looking at a pre-built or laptop solution instead, Newegg's Laptop and Gaming PC Finder allows you to find the right laptop or gaming PC for your budget and the games you want to play. Check it out at the first link in the description below. Now in this video, I'm going to walk you guys through all the parts I picked and why, including some alternative choices, show you guys how to build this system and look at performance in detail a little bit later. Now talking of performance, let's start off with the CPU and GPU combo. In any build, these are the two parts that really define the kind of gaming performance on offer. And this is a combo I've actually never used before. CPU wise is the Ryzen 5 5500. I've had good experiences of this, few key reasons for that. Multi-core performance is good with 6 cores and 12 threads, great, and it also gives me a boost clock speed of up to 4.2 gigahertz. That's going to allow for decent single-threaded performance too. All of this comes in at around $93, which is less than Intel's option at this price point, which would be the i3-12100F with its smaller core count and more expensive motherboards. The Ryzen 5 5500 has some cheap motherboards available and also supports the more budget-friendly DDR4 memory. It pairs up perfectly with this, the ARC A750. Now, you might kind of be a bit surprised to see Intel ARC on the channel, and I haven't featured a lot of ARC GPUs to date, and there's a reason for that. The drivers and optimizations haven't been there, but they're getting a lot better, and when you look at the price of this card, you can commonly find it for under $200. I'll leave latest pricing and availability at the links below, as always. Now at under $200, I genuinely believe this to be a good value buy. It provides more performance than the RX 6600, that's the next best GPU from AMD, while Nvidia frankly have little competition on the budget end. The RTX 3050 6GB is maybe as close as we get, but we don't care about ray tracing or DLSS at this frame rate. ARC is going to be more than good enough for us. And I'm going to show you guys later where this succeeds and where it fails in those gaming benchmarks. So hold off, but don't discount ARC, especially at this budget price point. Now I mentioned a minute ago about how this Ryzen chip is great when it comes to budget motherboards, and I wasn't wrong. This is the Gigabyte B550M DS3H, but Gigabyte have a few incarnations of this board that all look very similar. You want the B550M and whatever's cheapest. As I say, we'll leave some links down below. This particular board's good. We haven't got Wi-Fi. That's something to bear in mind. At that budget price point, it is going to add cost, and you can pick up a Wi-Fi dongle. Again, I'll leave one down below if that's something that you really need. We've got to make some sacrifices here to try and ensure we get the best possible performance. Like, building a $600 system takes me back. I used to do loads back in the day. Let me know if you'd like to see more budget builds here on the channel. I feel like maybe we got a bit lost with all the high-end stuff recently, and this still excites me, genuinely. Great board. It's no frills, but it's going to do the job absolutely no problem. Room for our M.2 drives, even a little toolless installation method. So, you know, good to see Gigabyte move in at least slightly with the times on these older motherboards. Now, as far as installing the CPU goes, this is pretty easy if you've not done it before. If you've only seen videos where people look at the new fancy stuff, one thing that will surprise you though is that the pins on this CPU are actually on the CPU, not the motherboard socket. So rather than being super careful of the socket, we need to be super careful of the CPU. Look at that 5500. Ah, takes me back. I'm feeling like this is like an OG GeekaWhat video. It's exciting. First things first, open that CPU nice and carefully. There we go, and grab it by the sides. We don't want to touch the pins on the underside. It's a good idea to make note of where the golden triangle is on the CPU, as we've got to match this up with the triangle on the socket. That's just here in the top left. Lift the arm out and upwards, and then go ahead and drop the CPU into place. Be careful, make sure it's seated. Give it a wiggle. It should feel like it's in. Arm goes down. How easy was that? Super, super simple. While I'm here, I can also go ahead and pop the CPU cooler in. Now, again, this is an AMD Ryzen stock cooler, and at this price point, it's saving us so much cash. It's great. Now, this comes included with the 5500, and you can even see through this little plastic here that the thermal paste comes pre-applied as well. Winner! Now, this is going to keep the chip nice and cool. It's only got a 65-watt TDP. It's not a particularly power-hungry CPU. There are some good budget alternatives if you want a standard tower air cooler for a bit more cooling, and mainly less noise is the only real advantage. I will will pop those down below as well. Now, you'll see that these black plastic brackets that I'm actually removing from the motherboard. These are mainly for installing either really old coolers or some liquid coolers use these. The stock cooler doesn't need them. So go ahead and unscrew both of these brackets. Just keep this mounting hardware safe once you've removed it in the motherboard box, as if you do change the cooler in future, you may find that you potentially need it. Now what we're then going to do is going to pop the CPU cooler itself on. Looks like there's plenty of clearance. You have to be careful sometimes with the AMD logo on this side, as it can get in the way of the RAM DIMMs. So just to be safe, I'm going to go ahead with the AMD logo on the other side instead. Get that all lined up and then just screw each corner of the CPU cooler in bit by bit. Don't do one fully, then another. Do each a little bit, go in laps around the cooler until you're satisfied that the cooler's been installed correctly. Then just plug the fan header into the grey port on the top of the motherboard. The next step of the build is the memory. Now for this build, I've gone for a bit of a classic, this T-Force Delta RGB kit. If you see my recent higher end builds, you'll have seen this DDR5 kit in action, but this is DDR4, two 16GB DIMMs for this build, giving us 32GB of memory. Now, arguably a little bit overkill as I pull back the notches on the grey slots for this system. However, I do think for the extra, I think it worked out about $30, $32 to get an extra 16 gigs. I think that is going to be better, especially for the future. I'm not saying this build is the most upgradable system I've ever assembled. However, 32 gigs is nice to have. Now, talking of extra budget, the SSD is another area where that applies. Now, in the budget, I factored in 32 gigs of memory and a 500 gig SSD. This one is the 1TB model, and I do think, again, it makes sense. If you think storage is more important to you than memory, notch the RAM down to 16 gigs and get the SSD upgrade instead. I knew I could afford to do one in this build, and I thought the memory was the important one to do so. The P3 Plus, I think, is going to install in a toolless fashion. I know it goes in this top slot, a little something like so, 45-degree angle like that for pushing down. However, we have this sort of weird toolless mechanism, I think. Oh, maybe like that. Is that right? No. Aha! I figured it out. So this kind of unclips like that. The drive slides in. This is a little bit fiddly, I'm not going to lie. Drive slides in, and then that goes back into place and secures the SSD in. That's kind of cool. Yeah, I quite like that actually. Just a little bit of a, not very self-explanatory. I'm sure the manual does have a few details on this, but that's how you install the SSD. And with that, the motherboard assembly is pretty much ready to go. CPU, cooler, RAM, SSD, motherboard, all nice and sorted. Next step is the case. This is from Antec, and it's called their AX20. Truth be told, anything that supports at least micro ATX motherboards has preferably a tempered glass side panel and costs less than about $45, $50 will work for this build. I paid in UK money about £28 for this, which equates to about $37, $38 in USD. So you can see we're keeping it on budget, all about what you like the look of. Now this also does have some features other than it's, I don't know if it's beautiful, other than its visual appeal, there are some practical features too. You get a power supply shield, so that's going to hide the PSU away in the bottom. And then at the front of the case here, you can see we've got 320mm included RGB fans. That's going to be great for airflow. It would have been nice to see an exhaust fan fitted. However, 3 at the front is going to provide enough air pressure for this system. So I'm not too worried there. Just removing the front and rear side panels, thumb screws on both sides, which is nice to see. As far as installing the motherboard goes, just need to lay the case down flat and make a note of where the internal gold standoffs lie to ensure the motherboard is installed correctly. You can see that the case comes with 4 pre-installed gold standoffs. These are enough for a mini ITX motherboard. Now we need to add extra ones up here, down the side here, and then we need a further 2 at the bottom. I'm then going to go ahead and add these standoffs in, install the rear I/O shield that comes with the motherboard, and screw that board into place. All that then remains are 2 main components. Now, I'm going to go for the PSU first. This is the Corsair CX650. Now, I'll be honest, if you want to save a little bit more money, you can probably go $10 or $15 cheaper. However, this is just going to be so reliable. The reviews, the reliability, that backing of a Corsair warranty, maybe I'm just being a little bit brand blind, but considering I picked this up, I can't remember how much it was. Let me check. Of $59 equivalent, I really don't think it's worth trying to scrape an extra bit, a tiny bit of saving out of there. there, especially when this also gives us headroom for any future upgrades we might want to make. Now, downsides, it's not modular. What that means is all the cables come spewing out the PSU, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't disconnect the ones you don't need. However, we are more simple with this being a lower wattage unit with what cables we have. We only have one 24-pin motherboard, pretty standard, a single 8-pin CPU, a pair of 6+2-pin GPUs, a SATA, and a Molex. So there really aren't extra CPU or GPU cables to go around. That's going to help simplify the number of cables we need to try and store away. This has a power supply shield as well, so if we look around the back, you can see there is room to store those cables without them looking super duper messy. And that's going to allow me to go ahead and slide the power supply in. Using my handy dandy electric screwdriver, this feels a bit like cheating, to secure the unit into place. I've gone for a fan down orientation, which will pull fresh air in from under the case. If you're going to put the chassis on carpet, go for fan up and instead pull in air from inside the case, as you will starve this bottom vent. There's really not very big feet on this Antec AX20. Again, a little bit of a downside of a more budget oriented case. Then with all the cables, few things I'm going to deal with. Motherboard first on the right hand side, followed by the CPU in the top left, and then any SATA or Molex. It's Molex in this instance for those RGB fans at the rear. Anything else I'll cable tidy away a bit later. With all that done, it's time for the ARC A750. Now, I'm kind of nervous about using ARC. I've never daily driven ARC in a gaming PC, and I know that some people have better experiences than others. So excited to boot this up and jump into our suite of benchmarks. We're going to run everything from Fortnite, Apex, CSGO 2, the easy games, to more difficult to run AAA titles, just to see how on balance this thing stacks up. With this being a cheaper case, just need to snap out the PCI lane covers that we don't need. This is always a sign that a chassis is a bit more budget, but again, $600. This whole build costs less than a 4070 Super. I mean, how on earth have graphics cards got that expensive? I was going to say, how on earth is this build so cheap? How on earth are GPUs so expensive? Line the graphics card up with the slot. Yeah, look at that. That looks sick, you know? Oh, I like that a lot. It fits in the case perfectly as well. There's about 40mm to spare. Pop that card in. This is the limited edition Intel one, which you can often find for sub $200. However, there's also board partner cards now. ASRock one's particularly cheap. We've had good experiences with ASRock's Challenger brand. Not a sponsor or anything, we bought the ASRock card ourselves. But again, good experiences there. So whatever's good value for money with decent reviews is what personally I would go for. Nice little PCI covers on this AX20. I'm kind of impressed, you know, with this Antec case. Yeah, it's really simple, basic, quite small, but other than that, ticks a lot of boxes. GPU power cables are pretty much ready to go, so it should be a simple case of popping in the 6-pin cable on the right-hand side, and then the 6+2-pin cable on the left. Look at that. I think that's looking pretty good. All that remains is to tidy up the cable management, sort the rear panel out, and then jump into performance. But first, how good this system looks, it's time for a GeekaWhat montage. Moving through into performance, and this is the bit that really matters, especially for this build where I've made some part compromises to hit that crucial $600 price point. Starting off in Hogwarts Legacy at 1080p high settings, and things are looking pretty promising. 58 FPS on average is really good for an RPG, and certainly sufficient for what you need in a game like this. The game looked good at 1080p too, and the frame rate was pretty smooth all in all. In Apex Legends, again, the results were not too bad. 1080p high, and the build pulled in 80 FPS on average. Now, yes, this is not going to make you the next Apex Esports Pro. However, for $600, we're gaming at 1080p high settings and getting well in excess of that 60 FPS mark. Really great to see. In F1 2023, things get even better, where at 1080p medium settings, the A750 achieved 123 FPS on average. I mean, that is pretty nutty and well exceeded my expectations. Move through into Cyberpunk and we crash down to reality a little bit more, but the results are still not terrible. 1080p high settings, XeSS enabled on the quality preset, and this build delivered 54 FPS on average. Again, not a bad result. Now, it's worth noting that not all results are quite so positive. Fortnite at 1080p competitive settings, for example, we only managed to achieve 76 FPS. That isn't great with everything tuned down to low in a game that on other cards like AMD's Radeon 7600 performs miles better. It might be that we got some of our settings configs wrong here, but after a bit of a play, we couldn't get this to improve very much. StarField is a similar story where this build does struggle more, 1080p low, and it only pulled in around 40 FPS on average. Again, StarField is a poorly optimized game, so that gives the A750 a bit of a reprieve, but still not a fantastic gaming experience. To round things off in Call of Duty's Warzone, again here, the frame rate was more modest. 1080p medium with XeSS enabled on quality delivered 45 FPS on average. A couple of important things to note: we were recording using Intel's driver-based recording solution. Now this shouldn't have a massive overhead on performance due to the AV1 encoder on this card, but we did see a frame rate drop of around 5 to 10 FPS across the board when this was enabled, something which will deliver you slightly better results. All in all though, I was pretty impressed with this build, especially for $600, and I think that the ARC A750 remains the right choice for this system. Yes, it's more inconsistent than its Nvidia and AMD counterparts, but its value for money offering makes this build possible at such an affordable price point. Let me know what you guys think of this build in the comments down below. Check out the description for links to all the parts for different regions and retailers. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.